Hello and welcome to Swim, Education for Coaches, Athletes, and Parents.
The only podcast dedicated to club swimming.
Here we examine swimming and sports from three perspectives: the coaches, the athletes, and the parents.
Through our candid and unscripted discussions, we share our views along with advice and applications that can help coaches improve their coaching, athletes increase their performances, and parents boost their support.
So, welcome to Swim. Let's dive in. Hey, Jen, how's it going?
Hello, good afternoon.
So yesterday, I feel like I've officially switched over from coach mode into swim parent mode.
Oh, yay, what happened?
So this is one of those situations where you look back and you're like, what were you thinking? But I kind of screwed myself. So it's kind of interesting. So when I started the swim team, I really wanted to talk about unity and bringing everybody together. And so everybody wears the team cap, the competition caps. And if they don't have a cap, they can turn theirs inside out if they forget a cap, but they have to purchase another one. It's like $10. And so they wear those. And so when you come in and you look at the pool, everybody's wearing, there's three different colors, but they're all the same caps.
Yeah.
And so it really does build team unity. And when somebody new comes in, we give them a team cap, that kind of stuff. Well, my son, who just started swimming 2 weeks ago, said, "Dad, some other people are wearing a cap. I want to wear a cap." I was like, "Okay, well, I'll find you a cap," because I think I have a couple left over here from whenever I was coaching with the team. And I couldn't find any. And so I went and I grabbed a cap, and it's from the Zones team. It's the cap that we won for being the best team. What was it for?
Spirit.
Team sportsmanship, right? We won the sportsmanship award for it.
Yeah.
So it's red and it says the Zones, and it says sportsmanship award, all this. I'm like, just wear this one. And if they don't let you, then we'll turn the cap inside out or whatever it is. So like all he wanted was a cap. So I gave him the cap. We walk onto deck and I go up to the coach and I'm like, "Hey, yeah, he wanted a cap." She looks over and sees the cap. She's like, "No, I got a cap for you." So she grabs a team cap and gives it. He's freaked out. He's like, "Oh, it's great. Just like everybody else. This is great." Throws me the cap because I don't need that anymore. So I put it in his bag just in case. And then I was like, I need to Venmo $10 at this point. Because I wasn't going to take the handout because everybody else has to pay. So I was like, I had to send her $10.
Yeah.
With the rule that I established when I started the team. And I was like, oh, great.
Full
Awesome.
circle.
Yeah, but I was like, that's fine. It's what it is, and he enjoyed it, and now he has his cap, and everything's good. But I just went, all right, I'm definitely a swim parent now, at least for him. Swim parent mode, so it was pretty good. But I mean, I think that goes kind of into the topic we're talking about today, which is, as swimmers move up in age, and we're going to take it from an age point of view and develop physically, mentally, emotionally, etc. What are the skills that they need to learn and value and conquer in order to be the best swimmer they can whenever they get to, if they want to, into the senior level or elite level higher up? And so that's kind of what we're going to look at. And I want to start it off by just kind of giving an overall framework that we're going to work from that people can look up. So Canada Sportif, as they say, because it's French Canadian as well. They came up, their Olympic committee came up with a framework, which is the long-term athlete development plan. And you can find this free online, which is great. And they basically start off from little kids, like 0.
Right.
Age 0 all the way up to master's level. What are the different periods of growth, and what should parents and everybody be doing during those times? And so we're going to skip 0 to 6, even though I know you started swimming at the age of 4. Most people don't. So we're just going to say starting with 6.
Again, speaking of, that's coach's kid there, Matt. Coach's kid.
I know.
You have no other choice when your parent is coaching on the deck.
It's just not my experience. It wasn't. I went through this lessons program and then got into swimming at the end of it. So, it's kind of like, kids that grow up in their parents' professions, we always have insights and we get started a little bit earlier. So let's pretend you're an outlier on that one. And then we'll just kind of move forward with this. But anyways, 0 to 6 is get moving. And it just basically let them move, get them to be in spurts and let them play. That's all it is. So
Yeah.
there for males 6 to 9 and females 6 to 8, we have fundamentals, right? With the emphasis on fun. So we'll talk about that. The next age group is learn to train, which is going to be males 9 to 12 or females 9 to 11. And you can start seeing the growth spurt and puberty and everything starting to wedge between the males and the females. So then we have fundamentals, learn to train. Then we have train to train, which is 12 to 16 for males and 11 to 15 for females. And then train to compete, which is going to be your senior level at that point. And that's going to be 16 up to 23 for males and 15 to 21 for females. So basically, we're going to talk about fundamentals, learn to train, and train to train is going to be our focus here. And then you'll notice when we get to train to compete is the same thing as train to train. That's where we're really perfecting those skills and looking at individuals there. So that's kind of the framework from where we're going to go. But before we go there, I just want to mention, if you read this literature, which is not hard to read, it's out there for our parents to really look at and digest. And if you haven't looked at it, take a look at it, coaches and parents, because it can only help you. They don't give sport specific advice.
Correct.
It's just how many times should you compete? How many times should you train? What kind of training should you kind of get into at these different levels? And I'll kind of bring those up as we talk, but we also want to talk about sport specific learning skills. And the one that I am curious about when you teach this is reading the clock. Because that seems to be like the one thing that kids really don't want to do. So if we're talking about learn fundamentals, 6 to 9 years old, what are some of the skills that you really emphasize in your program that swimmers need to know if they want to be the best they can be?
Yeah. So I'm going to start by giving a shout out to my mom, because her whole career was, as I said before, never wanted to be a senior coach. She was, and still is on my own team, the age group coach. She loves little kids. She loves developing little kids. So this was always her specialty. So I was really lucky to grow up around somebody who was really good at this. And, so when I have built my programs, it's been based upon what I've seen great, age group coaches like her do. And, really that like 6 to 9 group, the number one thing that we always start with is something so simple as streamlines.
Right.
It's so basic. And I think even as they develop, and they might get really good at it, but like that is an everyday beginning of every stroke of every length you will ever swim.
Right.
So, we always start with push-offs and just teaching them how to push off and streamline correctly. Because even a 6-year-old, you can have a push off of a wall, and and you can do it in so many ways. Like a lot of times we'll use hula hoops that, they have to push off and go through the hula hoop. And, or we get fun noodles and we'll put them in a circle. So it's a smaller circle that they have to go through. Or even, under the legs that, you get everybody to line up and then the swimmer has to streamline underneath everybody's legs and come up.
Right.
So again, it goes back to that game, atmosphere that they don't really realize that they're learning, but they're learning.
Right.
So I always start with, streamlines, and just really for like the first month or two, that being a big focus. So, and then I would say from there, obviously, this is something that we didn't deal with a long time ago, but dolphin kicks. If you teach them at a very young age how to dolphin kick from the moment that they get in that pool, I mean, all you got to tell a kid is act like you're a mermaid or a dolphin.
Right.
And they love it.
Right.
But it sets them up on a trajectory that in swimming we need now. It's our 5th stroke. It's important. So with the streamline comes the dolphin kicks.
Yeah.
Those are probably my 2 have to hit, really for the first month of trying to get them as best as you possibly can, and getting kids to understand why it's important to have a tight streamline.
Right.
teaching them to go off of the wall with their hands down at their side and then go off the wall with their hands like this, or,
So that's the experimentation that I was going to get into, which is have them
yeah.
push off different ways and
Mhm.
have them decide and learn on their own what's the best way to get off the wall. It doesn't mean that they're going to do it successfully.
Yep.
That's the part, but at least they understand it. Because again, they can't think of it hypothetically. They have to experience it physically, and
Right.
then you have a chance of them learning it.
Yep, exactly. So, I mean, I think that at the very core of that entire, age group from 6 to 9, even if they've been swimming since they were 6 years old, that the beginning of a season, that and really throughout the season, you've got to continually be reminding them and showing them and doing things that's keeping it fresh in their mind why that is so important. Um, and then I would transition from that we normally start with freestyle. You go straight into freestyle because, no matter what, there's some times that I've said this to other coaches and they're like, I've never said it that way. But the majority of their life, they will be swimming freestyle more than any other stroke.
Yes.
And that is just the way that practices are. That's the way that it is. And so having a proper, great freestyle base is insanely important. So starting with really basic drills, making sure they're not pulling under their bodies, teaching all of the mechanics of freestyle. Again, I mean, that's just, I think probably at that age needs to be one of the most core things that you do with kids.
Right.
Because as they get older, we all know with swimmers, we're known for shoulder injuries. And most of the time, those start with bad technique.
Yes.
And that bad technique most of the time comes from freestyle because you are warming up freestyle. You are doing more freestyle than you are any other stroke. So
Right.
if you don't set a kid up from that 6 to 9 age to go slow and learn that technique to begin with, I really think that that's a reevaluation that you need to make on your program because freestyle is just a key. So what about you?
Well, I mean, I think like you talked about how like for the first couple months, we want to work on streamlines, we want to work on freestyle. I mean, I think for this age group, because it has to be so repetitive, you work on it the entire time.
Yeah.
And the framework that we talks about with this basic fundamental movement. So streamlines, pushing off the wall, freestyle, backstroke. That's that the majority of the swimming should be there. Can they do breaststrokers? Some are going to be better at breaststroke. Some are going to be can actually start doing butterfly a little bit. But if you get just freestyle and backstroke in, now you can have workouts.
Yep.
Right. And so you start working from that point of view. You have a lot of experimentation that you're doing. I think you're all right with that. Kicking is going to be a huge one.
Yes. That was my next.
Yeah, I mean, kicking on a kickboard, kicking without a kickboard, I think is more important to help them learn how to do that. And I think that if you really do a huge amount of kicking, that's really going to translate into better swimming long term. Well, why is that? Because we know that at least the way that I teach swimming is you start with level, then you work with your legs, and then you work with your levers, which is your arms. And a lot of the times we're so concerned about arms, we forget about balance in the water. So basic balancing drills that you can do with your swimmers at this age is really going to set them up long term because they're used to being on the ground where friction and gravity really help them. Now they're suspended in a liquid and they've got to learn how to maneuver their bodies in that way.
And, I always recommend, I think, pull boys. I've had a lot of coaches that are like, oh, that age group, don't use pull boys with them. But it's exactly what you said. I mean, pull boys make it to where they got to feel when they're off balance. They can't keep it in between their legs. And, if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So, we really introduce pull boys at a very young age because it's just one of those things that, again, teaches them that level part of it. And then when you take the pull boy out, that they can feel the propulsion of their legs.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely.
I never say, keep a pull boy out because I think it's such a great, piece of equipment that you can use to teach really young kids. And they love pull boys. Like they're a flotation device. It's very entertaining for them. So
it's ubiquitous because you can use it as a kickboard instead of a kickboard.
Yeah.
And I mean, at this age, if I were going to list out the equipment, it would be pull buoy and kickboard, period.
Yeah. Yep.
Goggles. I mean, if you want to
Yeah.
say that that's if you want to say that that's optional equipment there,
Yeah.
that's it. I mean, it's real simple. And the other thing that's really important for coaches to remember is that there's a difference between knowing what to do and physically being able to do it.
Yes.
Right. And that can really be day to day.
Yep.
That can be moment to moment with this age group in particular.
Yeah.
So my daughter and I have started working out together and lifting together because she's 13 chronologically, physiologically, she's closer to 15, 16. So she can lift some weights and start working on her condition and her strength. And so we go into the weight room together, and I've started helping her through the training with a strength coach as well, helping out. And she asked me, she goes, what are your expectations for me? Now, she didn't say it in that way. I think it was something like, I don't feel good today. So I took that as her question was, what are your expectations for today? And I just said to her, do your best.
Yeah.
If one day you can feel really strong and you're just cranking it, and then a day or two later, you're tired and sore and you can't, just do the weight, just push yourself and do the weight you can do. And I think with 6 to 9-year-olds, if they're on it with the kicking, great. If they're struggling with it, just encourage them. It could just be one day to the next, but it's the experimentation and the repetitiveness of the instruction. They know what to do and they're going to try their best to do it, but they're not going to be able to perform consistently.
Right.
So if you're teaching that, I think the second characteristic of this age group from the framework is really important, which is fun and participation.
Yes.
Just laugh with them.
Yep.
That they're doing something crazy. Capitalize. Maybe you have somebody who can't kick very well, and then you say, all right, everybody, let's kick like them and let's see what's going on, so they can feel like they're part of the group and they're having a fun time. And if your practices at this age group are instructional and fun that everybody can participate in, you're winning the battle.
Yes.
You're winning the war.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think that so many times coaches really get lost in trying to structure their team as a whole, instead of like what we're talking about, that it's just, you have to individually take those age groups and where they're at mentally and do what you know is best for that age group. So like you said, there might be, people who see a group that's 6 to 8 years old, and every day they might do something for a little while and then they're playing a game.
Right.
But those kids are learning far more than most people really understand. So don't be scared to think that, a parent is saying that their kid isn't learning or they're not progressing, because what they don't really realize is, like you said, it's so much of them feeling the water, having fun in the water,
right,
making sure that it's a safe place that they'd like to come to. So even on those bad days, they're like, oh, but I get to go to swim practice. And, for my mom, so many kids are like, oh, I get to go to swim practice and see Coach Beth. And it's a big deal, for them to know that there's something for them to look forward to. So, but I'm going to kind of progress it a little bit farther, that, free and back are always kind of the beginning of it. And really, we don't approach breaststroke, which would be the next one to me. We don't approach breaststroke until really after Christmas time, if, depending upon the group that you have, they're ready.
Right.
Because breaststroke and butterfly are very unnatural strokes. So,
well, to some people, they're very natural.
Yes, to some people, they're very, my daughter, for instance, with breaststroke, but for most people, they are very unnatural. And so it takes a lot more time to slow it down. Kids get really frustrated.
Right.
Easier when you're trying to do breaststroke and butterfly. So that's why, I always think you get through Christmas break and then you can start slowly introducing breaststroke and doing things that are fun to make it seem like a more fun stroke. And butterfly really, that's just a really, really end of the season, and like you do randomly, because number one, the big thing with butterfly is it takes a lot of strength to swim butterfly. So a lot of kids are genuinely just not developed yet. And if they don't have that natural feel for the water, butterfly is really a struggle. So, it's always, I feel like your progression always has to kind of be see the kids that you've got in that group and where they're actually at, and don't rush into all 4 strokes immediately,
Right.
especially because with meets, a lot of times I find parents will, want them in every single event. And,
Right.
you
Because
know,
they're there. They might as well swim
right,
everything.
because they're there and they're like, well, I don't want them to just swim 2 events. Let's swim everything. And there are some kids that like they're fine with it. And even though they know their butterfly's illegal, they still want to do it and
Right.
know they're gonna get too cute and the parents are fine with it. I don't think there's really a reason to stop them from doing that. The only reason to stop them from doing that is if like it takes them 10 minutes to swim a 25 butterfly. Then yes, by all means, do
Yeah,
not
back it up. That's
no
true.
one, you don't want to be that coach on a beach where you're the one with the kid that's swimming a 10-minute 25 butterfly. But
With everybody looking at you and you're like,
yes.
sorry.
Thanks.
Yeah.
But again, I think just developmental wise, that age is always just try to keep with the core things that need to be, utilized on a daily basis and then slowly build in, breaststroke and butterfly, but work more on, again, starts, right? I mean, teaching them to dive off of a block. Let's go there. That's key. I mean, so
Right.
many kids at that age start where they are scared to go off of a block.
Yep.
And so taking that time every day, whether you're, starting from the deck or a gutter and then slowly moving them up, but getting them to dive correctly is one of the very important things to do. And there's so many games that you can do with it that kids love to do it and want to do it. So I always kind of think breaststroke and butterfly should be on the very, very end of it.
Right.
Because this is just not the age where it's super important for them to have that mastered yet.
Right. And I think once you get to butterfly, you can introduce fins to the net bag.
Yeah.
I think that would be the first time that I would introduce fins. I mean, you can make an argument for earlier on just for fun and participation and for freestyle flutter kick and underwater dolphin kicks.
Yeah.
But personally, I would rather have them wait until they're swimming butterfly to really kind of get the strength, because that's gonna bring some strength in there. You talked about starts. There's also turns.
Yeah.
So, you have to teach them a flip turn. You got to teach them an open turn. And one thing that I've learned is like with the open turn, it's so technical because it's touch with 2 hands, throw the elbow back, answer the phone, push off the wall, and they're trying to do too many things. I found that you're going to criticize me for this because it's deadly, and I understand it's deadly, but I teach them freestyle open turns with 1 hand.
Yeah.
Okay. And so they'll come in freestyle, they'll reach with their dominant hand, and their elbow's already back. So they don't have to worry about this motion. So now they can just come back and get the push off the wall, and they get it instantly. It's crazy how fast they get it. But if you only do it with freestyle, then you don't run the risk of breaststroke and butterfly being a one-handed turn.
Yeah.
And if they can't do a flip turn, then you're teaching them a very fast turn fundamentally that's going to help them later on.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've heard the criticism or critique from friends that are coaches that are like, I'm afraid they're going to do one-handed touches on their breaststroke and butterfly. I'm like, if you never let them do that with breaststroke and butterfly, they'll register where it needs to be.
Right.
But it's one of those tricks of the trade that I think is really good is freestyle one-handed open turns, and it's instant. It's instant success. And so it's really good. But you got to build in those turns, basic flip turn and open turns, freestyle backstroke, maybe breaststroke, and the kicking and the starts. And so you're starting to get all that. But I find it's repetitive. It depends on the individual. And depending on how you set your groups up, what your criteria for the next group to be moved up to is going to be. And that's where coaches are all going to be different. There's no right way to do it. There's only a few wrong ways to do it. Right. Yeah. And which is the fun part of that. When do you start? Like I said at the beginning, when do you start letting them read the clock?
So honestly, this is a really interesting subject that I actually this year I had a discussion with my staff about, because we are facing now, and let me preface this in saying a lot of my staff are teachers too.
Right.
And so at my pool, we have digital clock.
Right.
And so when you're teaching, younger kids, a lot of them, even with their Apple Watches and like the basic clocks that they read are digital.
Right.
So when you start teaching intervals and how to read a clock, we used to be able to do it because the clocks were like a real clock, that there
Right.
was a hand and you could teach them in halves. You could show them on the clock how you subtract 10 and, and go over it. And we were finding over the past 2 to 3 years, kids, it was actually harder for them to look at a clock like that than it was to do it off of a digital clock and then do the math in their head.
Right.
And because they're being taught, because everything is digital now, how to read a digital clock and subtract, in their minds from that, instead of seeing a circular clock and the halves and, and just looking at where the hand is at, because even in most pools, you rarely see those clocks anymore.
Yeah, they're gone.
I mean, most
they're
of them
not reliable. They break down all the time.
Yeah. So we actually found that what we did with a really, really younger one, so I'm talking like 6, 7, 8 years old, right? Is because most of them at that point really don't have Apple Watches or phones or anything yet.
Right.
So they are in schools where most of the time there is still a regular clock. And they're being taught in pre-K and stuff, still with a circular clock and a digital clock.
Right.
So we always start out with the circular just to physically show them how exactly how teachers do it, that 15s and then 10s and then 5s and subtracting that way. But we don't do intervals until they are 9, 10, 11, 12 years old.
Right.
We just start teaching them. And the way we start teaching them is saying, okay, you're going to do 10 25s and you're going to rest 10 seconds in between. Watch the clock.
Right.
You need to watch the clock for 10 seconds. So that's really the introductory part of it. And then once they get developmentally wise that they're old enough, that's when we will sit down with a digital clock. And we take an entire practice sometimes where we're just sitting there and we'll say, okay, the interval is on 110. If you leave on the 00, what's the second one? What's the third?
And then all the guesses. 15, 11.
Yeah.
11? How'd you get 11?
Yeah. But the funny story that I want to tell on myself is, which makes me feel really old now that I'm saying this out loud, but like I always say, even with the digital clock, leave on the top. And like a year ago, my kids were like, what does that mean? Why?
Yeah, I was gonna mention this, is like, you ask them, what does it mean to leave on the top and what does it mean to leave on the bottom? They're like,
yeah.
It's the zeros and the 30 and I have no idea why.
Yeah, because the digital clock, they're like, what? That doesn't even make sense. And so when I actually had to explain that, I had to take senior level swimmers over to like
the old senior level swimmers?
Yes, old school clock. I had to take them over and be like, here is the top, here is the bottom. But the worst part is when, these are teenagers, obviously, and they're like, that's the 60 and that's the 30.
Yes. I'm like, and we will still be using top and bottom. Thank you very much.
But again, I mean, it's a story that like, we're used to using those terms because that was kind of ingrained in all of us. And so I mean, my swimmers know now that like when I say the top and bottom, they know it's 00 and 30, but like, that saying that I never like had been questioned before then about it. And it just made me laugh that I'm like, wow, are we at this stage now? We're like,
yes,
that's not a thing. And so, but we have found that, because of the digital clock age, you really do have to almost take an entire practice with kids because they are having to do math in their heads now.
Right.
Not that they didn't before, but they had that visual of being able to like just go 10 back with the hand. And now they're having to literally do subtraction.
Well, it's different math because before it was geometry, right? You just shift the shape. Now it's algebra. And who likes algebra?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, and I will say there's sometimes that like I get very, very angry at, senior kids that decide to not pay attention and go on intervals, that like I'll come back the next practice and everything's on like the 21
Yes, I love doing that.
or the 33 or like, and I'm
Yes.
like, no, I'm serious. You're doing math. Let's go.
Yes. I do that with my senior. I did that with the senior
Interval.
swimmers too.
Yes, like you don't want to go on a normal interval. Here you go.
Yeah. And
So,
you know what? They liked it because it gave them
yeah,
something else to think about and it was
exactly.
helpful.
And I do think that as they get older, doing more challenging things for them to have to think about, it's more entertaining. But with little kids, I think it's just little baby steps. But really, my advice to coaches is the way that kids are learning in school is constantly changing. And something like reading a clock is math. And
Yes.
if you don't understand how they're being taught in school, it's going to be really hard for you to teach them, how to do this if they're being taught some other way to subtract something. And it's crazy that us as coaches are having, that we got to think that way, but that's just the way, education has developed. So I
Yes.
think just make sure and ask some parents, or even ask some kids, hey, how did you learn how to read a clock? How did they
Right.
teach you this? Because generation to generation, I think it does change a lot of how they're doing it. But I definitely recommend take the time to sit down and do, if it takes a practice or two. It doesn't mean do it all week long,
Yeah.
but be patient with, and even as they get older, be patient with them. Now, by the time that they're 16, 17, 18 years old, this
Yeah,
should be
definitely.
a thing.
I would think
But
around 13, they, 11, 12, 13, they should be getting, if you're working with them, if you're giving them that option,
yes,
if you're helping them out instead of taking over, it's kind of like as parents, we want to take things over because it's faster and more efficient
yeah.
instead of struggling with our child so that they can be faster and efficient on their own. And
Yeah.
so you have to give them that space.
And I definitely
Let's
think
move
the other
on.
recommendation is don't start them out on crazy
Rest
intervals.
intervals are perfect.
Yeah, I mean, don't try and make a 6 or 7 or 8 year old read a clock in that way. It can be rest 10 seconds. It can be, okay, you're gonna leave on the top every single time.
Right.
That you can tell them what that interval is before they go. And then slowly be like, okay, this is on the 115, so it needs to be 15, 30, 45, 00. Tell them before they push off, and then hands off and see
Right.
if they can remember it and see if
Yes.
they can go through the stages of it. But don't do something where you're, putting something on the 25
Right.
or, that's really hard to figure out. Start slow and progress from there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we have learn to train, which is the 9 to 12 for the males and 9 to 11 for the females. Again, it's still going to be fundamentals that you're
Yeah.
teaching here. So you're refining, but so this is where you start definitely breaststroke's already in.
Yeah.
Butterfly, because of strength, I think starts here.
Yeah.
Yes, they can do it. And yes, they learn the skill, but being able to train it a little bit and being able to allow them to have that as part of their sets. And it comes down to the individual, right? You
Yeah.
might have a group of swimmers that can really do butterfly well, let them train it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But it's as a group, this is where they should be able to do all 4 strokes. They should be able to do open turns and flip turns. Definitely backstroke flip turns toward the end of the fundamental stages should definitely be there. And learning how to, count the strokes from the flags in is always fun and adventuresome. The one thing that I do there is I'll be on the edge of the pool with a kickboard and I'm like, I'm going to hold this where your head is so they get over that fear of hitting their head against the wall.
Correct.
So they can come in and so they have something soft there just in case. But that's a skill all by itself that they need to have. I would say toward the end, this is where you're starting to teach that a little bit more. At 8 years old, 9 years old, if they're looking over their shoulder trying to do the stroke count, that's totally fine with me. This group is where you have to add that in. And by the end of this group, they need to get that down pat. Backstroke starts instead of just falling in, learning the technique that goes along with it. Obviously, they're reading the clock. Obviously, you get the back to breast turn. I'm still open turning at this point. I'm not doing anything crazy there.
Yeah.
What other fundamentals do we need to add in?
I think that you really start developing their knowledge of drills.
Yes. Okay, great.
This is where you start introducing your kind of club-wide basic drills. So for us, a lot of it is catch up for freestyle.
Right.
Just very basic, not super intricate, but teaching them the importance of doing drills slow, what the purpose of the drills are, really going through and explaining those things. Because I think at this age, they can really understand why you would do the drills, and they can feel the difference of what a drill can correct, what a drill can help. So I definitely think at this age, this is full introduction into all of the different drills that you would use for basic drills for each stroke. So once they get to a meet, when you have them do drill in a, for warm up, they have a little bit of pick and choose that they can do, that they understand them for, whatever you might be doing at the time. So this age is definitely introduction to drills and taking the time to slow down to do that. And teaching them, like I said a little bit a second ago, but like, it is so important to me that kids understand what the purpose of a drill is, and constantly reminding them, we do this drill for reason A and B. Here's what you should be feeling. Here's how you should be doing it. And so it's very important at this age that, again, it's that repetition that can get really boring, but it's that repetition that's needed. So as they get older, it's stuck in their mind that this is what this is used for, and this is why I need to be doing it.
Right. So they can self-correct.
Yes.
Because later on, as they get more advanced, you can say, they can say to you, I don't feel good about this. Well, what drill would you use? Yeah. Let's try this drill. Let's try this drill. And so they can start trying to fix it when they're given a choice of drill during a warm up or something along those lines to kind of know more about the stroke. I think this is also where you start getting the feel versus real. You kind of reference that. You feel this is what the real technique is.
Yeah.
So let's try to feel this so that you can look like this. So you're trying to teach that together. Otherwise, there's going to be conflict. I am doing that. Well, yeah, but I want you to feel this way. And then that's going to self-correct the technique. But you've got to teach what the correct technique is so that they can get the difference between the real and feel that's occurring there. The other thing, when they're in the fundamentals, right? When they're up to 9 years old, it's just go.
Yeah.
They're going to race because they want to be first in the lane. They're going to go slow whenever they're bored. They're going to we know from research, you can really address their flexibility. You can affect their strength. If it's just some resistant bands, just no weights, obviously, body weight, a little bit of that, you can move the needle a little bit at that age, but you can definitely help with endurance. Yeah. So endurance is going to be there, which is great. So you have endurance. This is the first step where you can start bringing in speed and train a little bit of speed. So we're not doing all the energy systems. Maybe toward 11, if they're more advanced, you can start doing that. But their body's going to have either endurance or sprint. They're going to have some speed work. And you can start working that in at this age group, but don't expect it to be training it a ton. Because mix it up. Let them have fun. Let them race. They want to do that. And you can train that a little bit, but it's not going to be the same level as the next level that we go up to. So you have that. And I think this is where Drylands can start coming in. But you have to be really particular about what you're training, because without the induction of hormones, hypertrophy, which is gaining strength to get stronger, isn't going to occur. They're going to, they can get a little bit with sport-specific movements, but they're not going to get a ton out of it until they hit puberty. Yeah. So with that in mind, flexibility, some yoga, some playing of games, medicine balls, maybe some TRX bands, something along those lines, just a little bit where they can really kind of do super loose with their weights, or they can adjust very easily, is where you would want to be with that. But that starts now with the basic fundamental movements of what they're going to train later if they continue with the program.
Yeah. Correct. And I think, the big thing that you said in there, I've always believed in this age group, Dryland should be more fun and games than it should be anything else. And, whether it's, Frisbee, whatever, kickball, things like that, that's more important than push-ups and sit-ups and crunches. And it's not that they can't do those things occasionally, but more just, giving them different movements that we know is going to be athletic outside of the pool,
Yes.
but not some strict dry land program or a bunch of push-ups, a bunch of sit-ups, things like that. Because I do think I've seen over the years a lot of programs that do start doing real, and not, weightlifting or anything like that, but they do a lot of dry land that's like real dry land, that the kids end up where, number one, they dread dry land as they get older.
Right.
But number two, they also feel more obligated when they're at home to do those things when they're at a young age, when they really shouldn't be. They should be going out and climbing a tree.
Right.
And I mean, again, there's tons of studies you can look at this age that your kids actually develop more muscles going out and playing with their friends
Right.
in
Yes.
the yard climbing a tree than they do if you go and get some professional, trainers that's going to do dry land with them.
Right.
So it's kind of the same concept here, like do things that are fun, that are games to them, that they're going to be using a lot of their body parts and things that are not so like specific and focused in the really training mechanism of dry land yet.
Yeah, I knew a soccer coach that would have kids, they were younger as well, like running hills.
Yeah.
Especially for punishment. Oh, you didn't kick it the way that I wanted you to do, go run a hill. And so I got on him a little. He's a friend of mine, and I got on him a little bit. I'm like, hey, nah, they're not the age where you should do that. You're teaching them that physical education or physical exercise is punishment, and we don't want to have that.
Yeah.
And you want them to have fun. So I went to a couple of practices, and the kids, they just did a lot more with the soccer ball and all this other stuff. And then at the end of practice, they all yelled, hey, do you mind if we go run some hills? And the coach turned to me and said, see, they do like doing it. I said, time out. They like doing it when it's not punishment and forced on them.
Yeah.
So now it's fun for them. So if they think it's fun, let them go run a hill or two. And they ran like one, and then they're like, we're done. And he's like, oh, let's run some more. I'm like, no, like if they want to do it, let them do it at the end of practice as a challenge. Make drylands about challenges that they can succeed at.
Yes.
But you're right. Like my son will come home and like, Dad, let's exercise. We're going to do some sit-ups. I'm like, let's go on the slack line.
Right.
Let's go. Let's you and me go on the slack line. Let you and me go on the swings. Let you and me go bike riding or something like that. He's like, that's exercise. I'm like, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Like I would rather you do that and establish that foundational athleticism that we want to have for you long term than, hey, you have to do regiment. And I think this is part of, and this is an aside that we can talk about it at future episode, but a lot of the times we don't give our kids a lot of space to just go out and play pickup basketball or devise a game in the backyard by themselves. Hey, sport is when we go to practice, not when we do it out here. Fun is whenever we do this at practice, not when we play with our friends, that's unstructured, that's not valuable. Actually, the literature says it's hugely valuable. Yeah. And from this age group down, it's gigantically valuable. And we need to let them just go play, even giving them time at the pool to warm up. Go follow the leader and do whatever you want. Yeah. They're going to have more fun with that, and they're going to warm up their bodies better than just giving them something that's strict. They'll have plenty of strict time ahead of them. Yeah. If you keep them in the sport, just let them have a little bit of fun and let them learn organically or naturally or based upon what they want to do, and you'll be A-okay.
And I actually have a story from practice last night, as a matter of fact, that one of the pools that we're at has a diving board. It's outside. And my younger kids that are this age group, when they get done, the number one thing that they always ask,
let's go on the boards.
Jed, can we have 2 jumps off of the board? And, last night I was like, okay, while I'm putting the flags up and everything, go for it. And they were standing there and I hear them go, okay, so what's the contest going to be? And the one was like, let's see how far we can streamline dive off of the diving board.
Right.
I mean, and again, that's proof, like nothing was said to them. Nothing was told them to do that.
Right.
They had fun doing it, and then they wanted me to judge who jumped the highest off of the diving board. Like so it's things like that. If you allow them to play at the end of practices that like they love so much. And the funny thing is that, when they go back to my other practice at my other pool and they tell the other kids that they're like, oh, I'm so sad we don't have the diving board. And the kids are like, diving board. and they're like, oh, the best practices are at that other pool. We get to go off the diving board.
Right, exactly. And
They have no idea that, like, again, it's something that they're learning and they're having fun with. And I said nothing, but that's an example of something so simple that they enjoy a lot and they're learning something out of it. So, I highly recommend, and even if it's the blocks, right? I mean, most pools don't have diving boards
right,
anymore. But with the blocks, letting them do cannonballs off of the blocks at
exactly.
the end of practice. It's easy, but the kids love it and they look forward to it. So don't steer away from those things that make it fun. And I'll end on this and we'll go to the next age group. But I have a rule, and I've said this before with my own daughter, because we always come at this as parents too, that my daughter, 1 day a week, there are no sports. She's not
Right.
allowed to do sports. And she's got a test to study for. She comes home, she gets her snacks, she studies, and then I'm like, go outside. Like, I don't want to see you. Go get the neighbor kids, go play in the park, go climb a tree, whatever. And she goes.
Right.
And that's our rule because, number one, my daughter is insanely energetic and never can get energy out of herself.
Right.
So, but number two, climbing trees and doing stuff like that, I know the benefit of it. So we pull sports out one night that, we want home. We want her to be our kid. We want her to go and have fun and play with the kids. So I highly recommend doing it and making it a house rule at that younger stages, because you will see a difference in them, even if it drives you nuts having them home.
Yeah. Well,
If
yeah.
they don't want to go outside. But, again, I force my daughter that I'm like, yeah, no TV. You're not allowed to have electronics. Go outside. Uh,
Yes.
so that's my other recommendation. So let's go to the next one.
Okay, so train to train, that's 12 to 16 for the males and 11 to 15 for the females. And this is where you're at full blown practices. It's year round. They're choosing that this is their sport. Now, if they're a high school only swimmer, then it's only for part of the year. But this is where you can train all the energy systems. This is where all the skills need to be there. And if not, you're pulling them aside and working with them individually so that they can get better at the skills. This is also where I think, tragically, in some cases, people get locked into certain events and they say, I'm a breaststroker and this is what I'm going to do. Now, that might be true, but I've always had the idea of we teach an IM program. So you have to learn all the strokes. You have to train all the strokes, because at least for muscle development, it's going to give you all the different angles of the muscle so that you're stronger long term. Right. But I mean, this is where you can start saying, okay, I like sprinting a little bit more than distance, or distance a little bit more than sprint. Yeah, I'm still going to do the other events every once in a while, but I'm starting to hone in. I'm starting to become, if not, I'm a high-end age group swimmer, I'm a low-end senior swimmer, and I'm working toward, now you might be very advanced, and so you are a senior swimmer. But this is where the full package, that if you've done the work and they've learned the skills through your program, they have all the skill sets they need so they can really focus on training now. And that should be, this is where training becomes the focus. Dry land becomes part of the program, and it needs to be official dry land, getting into weights depending on the individual and how mature they are physiologically. And this is where you have a full-blown program and you're really saying, all right, I'm specializing now. I'm putting in the effort. I do swimming in school. I do swimming, maybe one more sport in school, and I'm really going to focus in and be the best that I can be.
And, I definitely think too, this is where you really see the maturity change. This is a very tricky group athletically, because, puberty hits at such different times with different kids. So it can be really tricky. I'll give my experience with boys, especially. I always feel like girls, it's really rare that you've got extreme cases, but boys seem to be very all over the place, that you could have a 15-year-old who still has not hit puberty and doesn't have muscle development, is still short, struggles mentally with it because their peers look like full-blown men.
Yes.
And, so it's very tricky, even training wise, because I have a lot of times where parents will be like, but my swimmer's 15, so they should be in this group. Yes, but from a physical standpoint, your swimmer isn't there yet. And it's not that there's anything wrong with that. We just want to make sure, progression wise, that they're not going into the group, that the standards are something that they can't meet yet. It
Right.
doesn't mean that they couldn't eventually meet it, but I've got my example of this right now is that I've got a boy, he just turned 15, but at 14 years old, he was 6 foot with size 14 feet.
Yeah.
And then I had another 14-year-old boy that was 5'1" and
Right.
and was tiny. And you're comparing apples and oranges. So I always think this is the toughest group because you've really got to compartmentalize their progression and their success. And if you do it based solely upon age and not their physical development, you really can run into a lot of problems.
Right.
Because they want to be with their peers. They want to, have that socialization factor. But when you start in on all of these different energy systems, it'll become very apparent very quick. You really got to separate groups now based upon, where they're at developmentally rather than an age. So I always just think that, test sets are a really good measure. Sometimes you can have kids that are smaller and that are not developed, but that they can go 900 miles an hour for 10,000 yards with no problem.
Right.
And then you just got other kids that just physically are not capable of doing that yet. So at this age, I always say be cautious of doing things based upon ages instead of where they're actually at, physically and developmentally in swimming, because you
Yes.
really can turn kids off. They can really walk away from the sport and get discouraged quickly, right? We've all faced that. So that's kind of my cautionary tale of this group. Just be really thoughtful of how you're planning things and whom you're putting where.
Yeah. And then also know that those that are the early bloomers, they're going to be caught. And so
Yes.
that's going to be, and this is where you start into, I mean, with the learn to train, you start in with more of the emotional and psychological tools, but this is where it definitely hits.
Yeah.
Depending on the individual. Now, a lot of those psychological issues can be caused by the parents impressing upon their kids at 11 or 10, 11 years old, you need to be at states, or you need to be at this proficiency level or whatever. It really is on here. And this is where I start seeing the parents going, okay, I've waited it out. Now I want to start seeing results. And they start really coming in. And so you need to start teaching about psychological skills. So how do we look at meets? How do we prepare for them psychologically? How do we deal with setbacks? How do I deal with, I'm not physiologic, I'm waiting for my body to mature while my friends are already there. How do I socially deal with that? But how do I be an expectancy is going to be there, because you're going to start seeing big swings and successes as we're coming through this. And it's really easy to say, well, when they're younger, it's less complex, and now it gets more complex. Of course it does, because we become more complex with this. But here's where we really want to start spending some more time psychologically working the athletes through, because for the first time, just because they got taller and stronger, they dropped time. Now they're not going to be dropping time as easily. This is where people start talking about plateaus, when plateaus don't have to necessarily be part of the swimming experience. And so I think that we already taught them the fundamental skills. They have those down. Now we're training, and now we're training not just the physical, but also the psychological. And I think that starts working up. And then as we get into the train to compete, it just becomes more individualistic and it becomes more intense.
And I think from a coaching perspective at this age is number one reminder is don't lose the technique side of it. I find a lot of coaches at this age group want to go, full all out hardcore everything, and they feel like there's no time anymore that they should be doing technique. But the reality of it is that it's probably more important than ever, because these swimmers' bodies are changing on a daily basis. So if you're not once a practice doing some kind of drills for them to be able to feel the development of their body and how things are changing, you're going to look down the road in 2 or 3 years and there's going to be some real bad habits because somebody got really strong and
Right.
didn't know how to adjust where they were at. Somebody had a growth spurt and didn't know how to adjust it. So again, my big advice in this age group is do not put your foot off the pedal with technique, because I think once they get to this point that their body changes so much, so very quickly, if you're not checking in every once in a while with that technique stuff, they can lose it so fast.
Right.
And before you know it, you look in the pool and you're like, where did that breaststroke come from? And what are you thinking?
Right.
And they don't feel it because they're like, well, this worked when I was 10.
Right.
So just make sure at this point that you're still really hammering in on technique and checking in with them about why they do drills, what they can do with drills when certain things feel weird, like you said, because their bodies are going to feel weird for like the next 5 years.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely.
and they need to know how to adjust things based upon how their bodies are changing. And, I want to hit on too what you said about the emotional and mental part of this is probably, to me, I would have to say, the hardest age group to coach.
Right.
And the reason I say that is their actual emotions are changing so much
Right.
that you get a lot of tears, you get a lot of anger, you get a lot of bad days, and they just sometimes don't know how to deal with them. So you've got to have a lot of patience to be able to help them work through that stuff. And to me, as a female coach, I can speak to this, and I know, Matt and I, we've both talked about this, but with females, it's periods.
Hmm.
And that is such a huge struggle at this age. And, we live in a day and age where this should not be some taboo thing
Right.
anymore. And as an athlete, it may need to come from your female coaches, obviously, but this is, I feel like, that we have a job as coaches to sit down and have an educated discussion with girls about how to take care of their bodies athletically when they get on their periods.
Right.
Because I know growing up, even though I had female coaches, I had male and female, but it was still one of those things that I never really got talked to about how to manage it until I was in college
Right.
and by the trainers there. And it's very important at this age because as they get older, I mean, when a female gets on a period, obviously their nutrition changes, their energy level changes, they've got cramps. I mean, and most of the time with swimmers, people out there that know this are going to love me saying this, but most of the time it never fails. Girls get their periods at the most important meets of the year.
Right.
And it's because they're nervous. It's because they've been working so hard. And when, most of the time parents, if they have not been athletes, especially if they haven't been swimmers, it's a very hard thing to talk about and teach.
Right.
So even as a parent, if your swimmer gets their period, I would have that conversation and be honest about it, because that is a really important tool for us as coaches to, for a swimmer to be able to say, I feel absolutely terrible. I'm sorry. I'm on my period. I have really bad cramps. I have low energy. I got to figure out how to manage this. And
Right.
that takes a while. It can really take, 3 to 4 years for a female to figure out how to plan when their period's coming, how to plan to give themselves nutrition enough to get through a 3 to 4 day meet, at this age that could be prelims finals and handle
Right.
it. So I definitely think at this age, this is a very important discussion that I feel like more clubs should be doing. And whether that comes from your safe sport coordinator or it comes from a team mom, or you bring in all the moms with
Right.
all of the, kids, I think it is just a very important training mechanism that a lot of clubs don't talk about that as athletes, as a female athlete especially, it really can make or break a lot of your training and the time that you put in if you don't know how to manage this. So I highly recommend doing that at this age of, giving them tools to figure out how to handle their bodies as this progresses as they get older.
Yeah, and I think I've heard coaches, in particular, usually it's male coaches, will say something along the lines of, "Well, I don't want to give them an excuse for getting out of practice, or I don't want to have to deal with it." I'm like, "Yep, you're old school, man.
Yeah.
Like, deal with it." And
Yes.
I always wanted my swimmers to tell me. Now,
Yes.
sometimes they would give me too much detail and be like, "All right, thanks." They're trying to do shock value and they think it's funny. But
Yeah.
like with my daughter starting to work out with me and with a strength and conditioning coach, I said, you guys have to communicate this. And she'll tell me, like, I'm on my period. I'm like, you need to tell the coach.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she's like, she just stares at me. I'm like, he gets it. He
Yeah.
needs to know. And then she saw him adjust what we
Yes.
were doing. And she's like, okay, I get it. And so now she feels more comfortable with that. And you want them to feel comfortable with that. So whatever mechanism you want to use for the team so that you can invite that kind of conversation. And with the males, it's also going to be, I don't feel good today because I'm in and out. My strength is sapped because I'm growing, and I'm growing 2 inches right now over the summer. And so I'm exhausted. It's not as stark and it's not as regular as it is with women in their period, but there is something you can split the men and the boys and girls up and talk to them individually and have them figure that out together. So, I just think that it gets tricky. And I think that if you plan the entire program on a progression of these are the skills at these ages that I want the age group coaches to be teaching, so that when they get to the senior swimmers, that they're prepared. And now we can really start talking about race strategy and true dry land and building the entire program and what's happening physiologically and what's happening psychologically, so we can hit all those different areas. That's built on the back of knowing what the progression is, knowing the progression of drills as they come up, knowing the progression of skills as they come up.
Yeah.
Knowing when we teach what, I think, is really important. So like if you were to talk to a group of coaches, what are some best practices you would share with them so that they can maximize what they're doing right now?
Mm-hmm. So I think number one, and we kind of hit on this when we were talking about group structures and move ups and things like that. Know your audience.
Right.
If what the way you may have structured your team the year before may not be the way that you structure your team this year.
Right.
So I think that's why it's very important as, a club to make sure you're doing evaluations, to make sure you're really communicating within your staff of the types of swimmers you have at different age levels.
Right.
Before you ever start planning a season, before you ever start with those core things, because year after year that could shift so much.
Right.
So make sure that you're seeing what the really overall picture of the different ages that you've got on the team before you start going into what skills they should be doing. And then my other big advice would be, don't be scared to scrap plans.
Right.
And the reason that I say that is what we discussed at the beginning with younger kids. I am one of those coaches that I'm a firm believer in. I give the ability to my staff to write their own workouts.
Right.
Because if you are not on that deck every single day and getting to know those personalities that are in the pool, especially, that really young age group, you don't know what's about to walk through that door every single day. So if you've got this very detailed, structured plan that you are demanding of your staff to hit these things,
right,
most of the time that's not gonna work, because you don't know what's gone on in that kid's day. You don't know if they're tired, if they're into it or not, and you might have to take something and say, you know what, we're going to do this tomorrow. Scrap this, we're not doing it. We'll do this. This is what they need today. So flexibility is so key in the development of each age group. And even with teenagers, it's the same way. I mean, finals week is notorious that when the kids have finals week, you're not going to have their brains in the pool.
Right.
The majority of the time, they're not going to be there. So just be flexible with the things that you're doing. Have a very generalized plan and marks that you want to hit, but not so specific that they can't, mold and flex with whatever shows up through your door that day.
Right.
That's very important to me.
I think programmatically, making sure that each coach in each group knows what they're doing. Anytime that I've seen success at a program is very structured. Hey, this is the gold group. This is what they need to do. This is the silver group. This is the bronze group. This is the red group. This is the black, whatever you call them.
Yeah.
But we know that if they're here, here's what they need to learn so that they can move up. And just having that little idea of what they need to know so they can move up can be motivating to the swimmers, but also it helps the coaches out a lot. The most successful programs I've been around have open communication between coaches.
Yes.
And advice. And it's not my group, it's our group. And the head coach is spending time, or the head age group coach is spending time working with the coaches to make sure that we're staying within the structure and can give advice and try to help out as somebody who's a little bit wiser. So there's mentorship that's occurring. And I think that the most successful programs have that structure so that coaches know what they're supposed to be doing, and they have an avenue, a sounding board that they can go to and ask advice on what for an individual swimmer or for an entire group. And I think that that's really important. And then I think the other where I've seen the best, especially with the age group coaches, is putting the right personnel in the right groups and making sure that the coaches that are coaching love what they're doing, or at least like what they're doing. Because sometimes we get groups we don't gel with our age groups, but it's going to grow them. And having that, changing up the groups maybe to make sure that your best personnel is with the best match for what they have. And then finally, I think that the best programs that I've seen, every coach knows why what they're doing is important.
Yes.
So they can communicate it to other coaches, but they can communicate it to parents as well. And they can communicate it to swimmers. So giving the why we do this is so important. And so if you're a coach and you're like, I don't understand why we're doing this, I'm early in my career, or maybe I'm a head coach and I look down the line, I'm like, why do we do this? Like, this is not really that important. Having that yearly evaluation about what we're doing and how we can make the program better, the top teams are doing that. And I think that's the best practices, which is always review what you're doing, make sure the personnel is there, and make sure you can communicate why. Because if you can't communicate why, the question is, why are we doing this? Yeah. And I think that that's really important. What advice would you give to athletes as they progress through a program?
I would say across the board, it is slow down to correct the important things. Yes. When a coach tells you something is important, to fix it, no matter what it is.
Right.
Do not think that you are gaining something by going 900 miles an hour doing bad technique, or doing a bad turn, or doing a bad start, because eventually that will catch up to you. Yes. So slow down, learn the things that you need to. If you need to go in the back of a lane to fix something and figure it out, do it. Because in the long run, it is going to progress you so much farther than continually wanting to lead a lane or be the fastest, because that fastest will eventually go from here to here to here because somebody's got better technique than you. So yes. And listen to those coaches and slow down and fix it. Even if you are a senior level swimmer, if there is something that a coach sees and they're telling you to change it, do it. If you are 6 years old and a coach is telling you to squeeze your ears with your hands, you try and slow down to do it until you figure it out. Yeah. Take the time to do it.
And that's easier said than done.
Oh yeah.
Because we wrap our identity around, I'm the leader of the lane. That's who I am. Now, if I have to go to the back of the lane, now I'm depressed.
Yeah.
You know, there's a funny story. My mom always brings it up, even today. But anyway, she brings this up. She goes, remember whenever they were going to ruin you as a swimmer? I was like, yes, I do. I came home and I was a breaststroker that was just high repetition. The tempo was really, really high, which is now the thing to do. So I was ahead of the curve, is what I want to say. But they slowed me down. They're like, you need bigger strokes, you need to glide more. I tell my swimmers the exact same thing because it's true. And I came in, I got in the car. She was like, how practice? Slammed the door. I'm like, they're trying to ruin me. They're like, what do you do? They're slowing me down. They're putting me in the back. I can't go super rapid. And then as soon as I did it, I started dropping. They knew what they were talking about.
Right.
So trust your coaches, give it a chance, but it's easier said than done. And that's going to be the struggle. And as a swimmer, we can say, don't get wrapped up in your identity. Don't get wrapped up in you do this so well. It's all changed, but maybe think about yourself as an individual that's part of a group. And then maybe I'm learning something at a different pace. I would say to the youngest swimmers, have fun.
Yes.
If it's not fun, make it fun. Challenge yourself. Tell your coach, this is no fun. Now they might say, well, it's not supposed to be fun. And there are sets that are not supposed to be fun. They're supposed to work, but you should find joy in what you're doing.
Yes.
And try to find that. And if you're not, talk to your coach about it. I'm losing my joy. What can I do to find it again? And don't be afraid to do that. Talk to your parents about how do I address this with my coach, because it needs to be fun. And I think that if you're doing that and you trust the system and allow yourself the grace to maybe not be the fastest all the time, but maybe, know that it's going to happen in time, I think you'll be better off.
Definitely.
So for parents, what advice would you give parents?
Patience.
Yes, 100%.
Know in everything that your child does, they are going to do it when they are ready to do it.
Yes.
Whether that is school, whether that is in your household, whether that is in a sport. And what I mean by patience goes along with, do not compare your child at any point in time to another athlete.
Yes.
Because their body is different, their makeup is different, and that's what makes them amazing. And if you take that superpower away from them, especially at a young age, where you are telling them, why can't you swim like so-and-so? Why don't you look like so-and-so? Why are you not doing this like so-and-so? You are taking away one of the biggest magical things from your child, which is their uniqueness and their ability to see themselves for who they really are, and not through somebody else's eyes. So please be patient. Let them find their way. Let them fail. Let them, learn at whatever pace it's going to take. And don't think just because they're not continually staying within their social group that they're a failure, because that is so far beyond the fact. And nothing is the great equalizer more than when a swimmer turns 15. Because as we know in USA Swimming, the age group is 15 to 18 years old.
Right.
So when you are a super fast, great 14-year-old, nothing shows you how that field magically goes from this to this than when a swimmer turns 15. Right. Because you now have a 15-year-old racing an 18-year-old. And it may seem unfair, but that's the way it is. Sport is. And if you make the Olympics, guess what? There's no age groups.
Right.
So, I say that because even as a parent, it has been such a pet peeve that I have learned over the years being a coach myself, that telling your athlete, you can definitely say, doesn't that swimmer have a really great dolphin kick? That's amazing. That's one thing.
Right.
But when you go and say, why aren't you as fast as Joe? You should be right there. Why are you not there? What are you not doing?
Or you used to be with Joe. What's happened?
Correct. Oh gosh, that's another one. Yeah. You used to be with them. What happened? Well, Joe grew 1.5 feet in 5 minutes. So I'm not there with them anymore. So please be patient with your swimmers and know the amazing kiddo that you brought into this world is going to develop in everything that they do in the way that they are meant to. And you just got to be supportive and loving and patient and remind them that practice makes perfect. That's the most important thing.
I think as they progress, being the encourager and being the supporter is super important. I think also asking your swimmer, did you do your best?
Yeah.
Was that your best? Was that your best? Now, you can't ask it in that way because that sounds like you're not going to trust them when they say, yes, that was my best.
Yeah.
But you've got to look at it and just say, are you doing your best every day? Yes, I am. Okay. Then I can get you extra help if you need it.
Right.
If you're not getting where you need to go, I will help you because now we have their absolute best and now I can help you. If they're not telling you, if they're not, tell them, if you're not doing your absolute best, then I can't help you because any support that I give you is against lower than the expectation, which is doing your best, not trying your best, doing your best. But that can be day to day, it can be month to month, it can be year to year.
Yep.
So just support them and ask them because what we want to teach our kids is working hard and doing their best. I can deal with it from that point on. The second thing is, parents, you're coming at it from a different perspective than your swimmer. You're like, oh, that's great because I can teach them and I can bring them in. But it's also a different perspective than your coach who's within the sport. So I've had parents that have said, well, my daughter is 12, 13 years old. Why aren't they at futures or juniors time? Because there's other kids, the comparison that's happening. Well, okay, there's a lot of factors. Talk to your coach about it.
Yep.
See what you can come at, but you're coming at from a very mature point of view. Your swimmer's coming from an immature point of view, and your coach is coming at from a 30,000-foot point of view, trying to build that your child up as they can. You've got to triangulate that, and you've got to say, okay, what is most important? That my kid is having fun, that they're learning the skills, and that they're progressing at the best that they can be. So just be supportive of that and don't demand that they need to be at certain times or they need to be at a certain race or they need to be making finals. Let them come into that on their own. Even your best elite athletes, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, whoever it is, they were at different levels as they came up and they chose when they were going to be the best that they can be. Be there to support them so they can be there and you'll get along the best. So, this has been a great discussion. I think that there's a lot of information that we gave out there, but my biggest thing is just let the swimmer progress through the program the way it was meant to be. And at the end of the day, they will be what they want to be. And we can't control that. We can only guide it and let them make their choices. And that's going to be the best for them physically, mentally, and emotionally.
Definitely. And I'll go back to my goal in life is being Michael Phelps's mom.
Right. Just be there to cheer.
Yep. Just be there to cheer and love them.
All right. Thanks. I will talk to you next time.
All right. Bye.
Whatever platform you're listening to, make sure you subscribe and hit the like button. And if you loved us, leave a review. Also, if you're interested in getting more information from this episode, click the link in the description and we'll send you notes from this episode. Finally, do you have a topic to suggest or want to share your thoughts? Email us at swimedinfo@gmail.com. swimedinfo@gmail.com.
Join us next time for a thoughtful discussion about swimming and how coaches, athletes, and parents can improve their performances. Thanks for listening to Swimmed, education for coaches, athletes, and parents.